Hey, what is going on, guys? In this video today, we're going to be going over 5 commonly shared Fortnite tips that are either wrong or misleading. Now, to be fair here, just because a tip ends up on this list doesn't necessarily mean it's always been bad advice. Certain aspects of Fortnite change so frequently that tips which may have been great guidance in the past can now be the opposite. And if you don't stay up to date with the quote-unquote meta of the game, it can be really hard to understand which tips are still valid and which aren't. So I hope this video will be able to help with that a bit, and without further ado, let's get right into it. Alright, so the first tip in this video that I now believe is incorrect is one that I've actually said multiple times on this channel before. Pick a sensitivity that you feel decently comfortable with and stick with it pretty much forever. The reason why I shared that tip is because that's exactly what I did back when I played on Legacy Aim Assist and settings. No joke, I probably changed my sensitivity 2 times from Season 3 or so all the way until the end of Chapter 2 Season 1. I just always felt like my aim was really good with my base sensitivity, so why try to fix something that isn't broken? However, what changed my entire outlook on this is when Legacy got removed and I was forced to switch to the new settings. When I made the switch, I initially tried to do exactly what I did in the past. I picked a sensitivity, and even though it didn't feel great at first, I thought I could just power through it, and within a week or two of not changing it, everything would be great. But as I'm sure you guys can guess, that week or two came and went, and my aim still felt shaky at best. So at that point, I decided to go against the conventional wisdom and start experimenting with a bunch of different sensitivities while playing games like Zone Wars and box fights. Within the next week, I probably changed my sensitivity at least 4 or 5 different times until I finally found the one that I liked the most. And with that sensitivity, I think my aim is noticeably better than it was with the initial one I planned on using forever. So the takeaway here is if you're using a sensitivity and you truly believe it's perfect, by all means stick to the old advice and don't change it. However, if you've been using a sensitivity for at least a few weeks and you still feel like you're missing shots you shouldn't be, at that point it's definitely worth trying something new. Also, all that I just said doesn't even take into account the fact that sometimes you want to change your sensitivity due to the current meta of the game. For example, right now if you're a controller player, the meta is to hop into boxes with shotguns and SMGs, so because of that, a high sensitivity is definitely better than a lower one. However, back when L2 spamming with Legacy was the meta, low sensitivity was better. So that's another factor that you need to keep in mind if you're considering a sensitivity change. Another common tip that I disagree with is to never take a 50-50 fight. Most people define a 50-50 fight as a fight that occurs when you and the enemy are right next to each other, you both have your weapons out, and since the fight's occurring at point blank range, it's unlikely that either player is gonna build. Now, the reason people say to never take these fights is because most of the time the risk outweighs the reward. Assuming both players have fairly equal health, in theory there's a 50% chance you get the kill and a 50% chance you die. That's not a fight that you want to take if there are other better options available. However, by saying never take 50-50 fights, you're basically living in a fantasy land. The truth is, there are a lot of situations that you'll find yourself in where a 50% chance of winning is as good as you can hope for. One example of that is when you're low on materials. If I have 100 mats and my opponent has 1,000, I would absolutely love a 50-50 fight, because if that fight continues like normal, I'm gonna run out of mats and it's probably gonna become like a 20-80 fight. Another time you want to take 50-50 fights is when you're being pressured by multiple enemies. If you let 2 or 3 people get together and spray your box at the same time, you're as good as dead. So if you can get a chance to 50-50 one of those enemies early in the fight, you gotta take it, because if you win that, now it's a much more manageable 1v1 or 1v2 that you actually have a fighting chance in. And just think about this, since matchmaking is still forced cross-platform, you're gonna end up fighting a lot of mouse and keyboard players. At point blank range, you have a huge advantage over those players because of aim assist, so fights that are typically referred to as 50-50 are probably more like 60-40 or even better in your favor. The next commonly shared Fortnite tip that I no longer believe is valid is the idea that you always want to have high ground in a fight. That right there is probably one of the most commonly shared Fortnite tips of all time, so I'm sure at least some of you guys are thinking, well, how is that wrong? I'm not trying to say that you never want to have high ground because that's obviously wrong. However, the piece of advice that's wrong is that high ground is always the best option. Because the power of high ground is so well known and has been since about Season 3, even average players have become great at countering it or taking it back via various building techniques. Then, the other negative of high ground is the material cost that it takes to acquire it. 90s, ramp rushes, and retakes are the three most common ways that players get high ground, and all three of those techniques burn through materials ridiculously quickly. If you start a fight with 500 mats and finally get high ground with 100 left, is that really worth it? In my opinion, definitely not. Next time you watch the Stack Competitive Fortnite event, pay attention to how many crazy build battles for high ground you actually see. Spoiler alert, it's not going to be very many at all. And I think avoiding fights for high ground is especially advantageous for low ping players. Think about it like this, in a build battle, your low ping is barely going to help you at all. It really won't even be noticeable. But in a low ground box fight, you're going to have a significant advantage against most players you fight just because of your ping. So high ground is still good, don't get me wrong, but it isn't the only way to consistently win fights like it was in the past. The next super common tip that's wrong is overbuilding is always bad and you never want to do it. At least by my definition, overbuilding is when you sort of spam builds in a fight and use more materials than you really need to. In a lot of situations, is that a bad thing to do? Absolutely. As I just mentioned maybe a minute ago, if you have 500 total mats and you're cranking 90s to the sky or spamming high ground retakes for no reason, then that would be an example of bad overbuilding, and you absolutely want to avoid doing that. But there are also a good amount of situations where overbuilding isn't a bad thing to do. The first requirement though is that you need to have at least a decent amount of mats. There's no situation I can justify spam building if you have 400 mats, but if you have 1400 on the other hand, that's a different story. One situation where I have no problem with someone overbuilding is if they can tell right away that they're fighting a really good player. If you try to be conservative with your building around really good players, they're gonna make you pay, and unfortunately you can't take your mats with you if you get eliminated. It's better to use 1,000 mats to give yourself a really good chance of killing a great player compared to only using 300 but really risking your life in the process. The other situation where overbuilding is fine is when you're up against multiple enemies. If you're fighting multiple players, you're gonna be getting sprayed and pushed way more than normal, so it's sort of a necessary evil to burn through a couple hundred mats just to keep yourself alive. But the second less obvious reason why you want to overbuild here is because since you have the opportunity to kill multiple players, you're much more likely to get a lot of mats off their bodies. If you use 1500 mats to kill 2 people but they end up dropping you 1200 back, you really didn't even lose all that many at the end of the day. The final tip that I strongly disagree with is the notion that a kill is always worth it, especially in competitive. The logic behind that saying really isn't even all that bad. Since enemies drop whatever they have when they get eliminated, kills, in theory, can be super valuable because you gain mats, upgrade your loot, and if you're playing competitive, you also get kill points. The problem is, a lot of people will take this advice to heart and become way too kill hungry to their own detriment. If you already have a really good loadout, max health, and a lot of mats, is it really worth it to put yourself in a terrible position just to pick up one kill? Probably not, because even if you get that kill, you're now really exposed to being third-partied, sniped, or rushed by another player or team. Becoming kill hungry can be especially detrimental when you knock an enemy in a team game mode. I know it sucks when you knock someone, they get revived, and then your teammate ends up stealing the kill, but you don't just want to mindlessly rush into the heart of the enemy team just to try to pick up that kill. So getting kills are great and all, but there are definitely situations where you need to let them go for the greater good. So I hope you guys enjoyed this video, and if you watched the entire thing, be sure to let me know with a comment down the comment section below. What's a common Fortnite tip that you personally disagree with? Be sure to leave a like, leave a comment, subscribe, turn on post notifications, do whatever the heck you want, and I will catch you guys next time.